Peppe, chiaro?
Sì, grazie mille. Stiamo partendo con le dirette. Tutte le persone sono online. Grazie mille. Buona conferenza.
Welcome to all to this session on climate justice and socio-environmental conflict, pathways of political ecology and agroecology between Europe and Amefrica Latina. This is a session inside the Geography and Political Ecology Conference of Society of Italian Geographical Studies. This session is organized by Massimo De Marchi, Daniele Codato, Francesca Peroni, and Alberto Diantini. And this session is part of the 5th International Conference on Climate Justice Beyond Emergency. Topics are very rich today. There are 3 main topics of the conference. One is about leaving fossil fuel underground. The second topic is about the issues of managing plastic waste from the vision of a global south country of Ecuador. There are then some issues related to agroecology in some different contexts and food sovereignty, concluding with topics related to urban food forest. I recommend to all the speakers to stay inside the presentation because we have many speakers. This session reached many interest, but we should make the presentation inside the 9 minutes. When you arrive to 6 minutes, I tell you, you have the last 3 minutes. Okay, I let the floor for the first presentation to Edoardo Crescini of the Climate Justice Monnet Center of Excellence to present a contribution on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, a plural bottom-up paths for phasing out. Please, Edoardo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Massimo. Thank you to everybody. Good afternoon. I am Edoardo Crescini, a member of research group Climate Change, Territory and Diversity. It's a multidisciplinary group composed by different figures with different background. And one of key topic we are investigating is to keep the oil underground using a geographical perspective. When we talk about these topics, we have to mention the unburnable fossil fuel resources, so the necessity to leave the fossil fuel underground if we want to remain in a healthy and sustainable planet. In our first study, McGlade and Atkins estimate in a percentage the remaining the part that should remain underground for fossil fuel in terms of oil, gas, and coal, if you want to remain below the 2 degrees of global warming, which is one of the target of the Paris Agreement, according to the studies. So from these estimates, only the 10% of all fossil fuel resource can be extracted in 2015. Then Wellesby in 2021 update the percentage using 1.5 degree of global warming. And so we can see that there is a lot of big difference in terms of coal that it's now, for this kind of research is like unextractable by 2021. And also they only not define the estimation in percentage, but also use a geographical perspective, so define the unburnable carbon areas. Also, in the last report, the IPCC want to highlight how much carbon global budget we have to remain inside the 1.5 pathways of global warming, and with a possibility of 50%, the global carbon budget that remain, it's 500 gigatons. Now, in a year, we consume at least 40 gigatons of CO2, or carbon dioxide. So it's quite impressive mission that the one that we have. Also in the global in the last production gap report, we can see that the production gap it's respect the production in 1.5 pathways. It's 121% more, and so the emission produced by the existing fossil fuel license production it's the double respect the pathways that we have to observe to remain in the target of Paris Agreement. Now I want to present the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a proposal for international agreement inspired by the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapon, which commits countries to no proliferation of fossil fuels and to address the current climate crisis. It's supported by different by a global articulation of climate justice movement, but also indigenous and civil society organization, and based on three fundamental pillars. The first is the non-proliferation, so ending the exploration and expansion into new fossil fuel reserves. The second one is the global disarmament, so stop the extraction and close the already open license, because also from the International Energy Agency, if you want to remain under 1 degree of global warming, but also 2 degrees of global warming, we have to close also that site of fossil fuel that are continuing the extraction, so that the one that are already opened, and also remove the subsidized international, national, and private of fossil fuels, and dismantling the obsolete infrastructure. Then the last one is the peaceful transition, so the promotion of energy transition with clear pathways and proactive plans to support not only the climate, but also workers and community, because the unburnable carbon is linked not only to the climate justice topics, but also on related on social justice. So enabling fossil fuel production country to create a diversified economy, and how to do that with an international cooperation, as we can see from this graph produced by Monnet and Carta, where it is essential to manage the transition in an internationally cooperation, international governance, because many countries, as we can see, can't undertake the transition on their own, but there are others in position to do that. And so with the international cooperation, we can reach a global transition for all the states, in particular the one that are producing fossil fuels resource. This is a declaration from Vanuatu and also from Tuvalu, that is the first, the two first countries that endorse as countries the.
Edoardo, you have the last 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Massimo. That endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. As we can see, the solution and there is, but the fund for climate is basically lower, much lower than the fossil fuel subsidies that that all the stakeholders income in the economy. Then there is the objectives of this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty linked to the motivate city states, create global movements, use the increase of transparency and accountability, but also change the global norms on fossil fuel, related also to the document of the COP, put inside the document the word of fossil fuel as in COP26 in Glasgow. Many cities have already endorsed the treaty, like Vancouver, Sydney, but also Turin, which was the first city in Italy to endorse the treaty. We are now counting like 60 cities around the world that endorse the treaty. We have on a parliamentary call for fossil fuel free future. Now we have like 550 parliamentarians that endorse this call from 70 countries. And again, there are many scientific academics and scientific researchers that endorse and called for a fossil fuel non-proliferation, more than 2,000, but also 100 of Nobel laureates, like the one like as Dalai Lama, which endorse the treaty. And to finish, this is the last breaking news that we have today, arrived today, the endorsing by the World Council of Churches to call for a fossil fuel no proliferation treaty. This organization is represent more than 300 churches around the world and mobilized like 500 million of Christian from around like 120 countries. So it's like a big organization, and it's very important also the endorse of this kind of reality. Thank you for the attention.
Thanks, Edoardo, for your contribution. I think this is a very important example of a world action toward phasing out of fossil fuel. Let the floor now to Daniele Vezzelli. Daniele is present here in Milano. He will present us a contribution about unburnable carbon for climate justice, a proposal of criteria for fair and just transition away from fossil fuel. Please, Daniele, the floor is yours. As you know, when you arrive at 60 minutes, I tell you the last 3 minutes. Sorry, but it is the only way to arrive on time at the end to have a space for a short debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Massimo. Good afternoon to everyone. Since Edoardo has already explained the concept of unburnable carbon, I will skip directly to the equity issues that unburnable carbon causes on where to allocate the remaining carbon budget. The question we are trying to answer is which countries are entitled to use the remaining carbon budget today for the transition. In this context, climate justice recognizes the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to fairly allocate the remaining carbon budget. What we intend to do with this presentation, with this study, is to find criteria to assign fair mitigation efforts for achieving a fair transition. What I intend for a fair effort is a mitigation supply side effort that translates to less rights of extraction for duty-bearer countries or areas inside countries, or compensation to right holders countries to keep the reserve untapped. These criteria I will present are geographical criteria, and based on their type, we can distinct in between countries scale criteria or within country criteria. The between countries scale approach will allow us to allocate, to geovisualize and allocating the fair mitigation efforts between countries, and therefore identifying the rights holders and the duty bearer countries. Whereas for the within country approach, it's an approach at an operational scale that will help us achieving an equitable transition by developing unburnable carbon scenarios to geovisualize where to leave fossil fuels on the ground, and so where extraction should cease. The first step to define criteria is a literature review. These are some keywords for the research. This will help us to come up with a first proposal of economic, infrastructural, but also ecological, conservation and sociocultural criteria. And very important is the data mining of criteria respective parameters in order to quantitatively measure the criteria. In this image, it's part of the database in which we collect the parameters of criteria. And where necessary, parameters must be adjusted by adjustment factors, as we will see in the next slides. Once identified, the criteria, actually the parameters, will be weighted and operationalized to develop spatial multi-criteria analysis at between and the within country scale in JS environment. Here I try to hypothesize some scenarios. For example, ecological conservation scenarios will include the criteria that will help us to develop the multi-criteria analysis to understand the fair efforts that country have to deliver in order to safeguard the biodiversity and ecosystems. This is the proposal of criteria divided in the categories. Unfortunately, due to time constraint, I will not explain the reasons behind the selection of each criteria, but I will illustrate scenarios, simple scenarios with two criteria. Must to have criteria in literature, such as the historical responsibilities and the development of a society within a country. The proxies we chose for representing this criteria are the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions and the Human Development Index for the development of societies. And as we can see, as the cartogram suggests, we can see that in terms of responsibilities and the required fair mitigation efforts, Global North is required to deliver greater mitigation efforts than Global South. The other approach is the within-country approach. As Mattit and Carta said in their 2020 article, whereas every country has a multiplicity of sources of territorial emissions, extraction generally occurs in geographically specific places, where the resources are located affecting specific workers and communities. So it's important to identify geographical within-country criteria, possibly with local communities, in order to identify to develop unburnable carbon scenarios at the extraction unit scale, as you can see in this image, which represent a multi-criteria spatial analysis for the extractive basin of the North Sea, which will help these within countries analysis can help decision makers to can support the decision making in their decision making process. In conclusion, these geographical approaches and criteria will help us geovisualizing climate justice by identifying unburnable carbon countries and unburnable carbon areas, and therefore supporting decision-making at different levels, governmental, intergovernmental levels, local levels, in order to achieve a fair and just transition away from fossil fuels. So thank you very much for the attention.
Thanks, Daniele, for the presentation, also to stay on time. Now the floor to Francesca Maesche. She presents an interesting work about the issue of Colombian Amazon, peasant ontology and government narrative, a political ecology of frontier dynamics. It is an interesting analysis research. Is part of the research of the master thesis on the Colombian frontier inside the issue of energy.
So hello, thank you to everybody. I'm going to present this work that comes from the thesis that I presented for the master that we said of sustainable development. This research lasted 6 months, and it was developed in the Northern Amazon in collaboration with the Universidad del Valle, which, and this is a part of a One Amazon project, a project ongoing of 3 years, lasting 3 years, that has 2 focus areas, one in the Amazon region and the other in the Caquetá region. And the University is collaborating with the Peasants Association of Cordosa, Castrajur, and Aso Portales to to work locally. And the research want to answer the question, which are the government and peasants contrasting discourses and representation of the Amazon at the root of frontier dynamics in Caquetá. So the Amazon region has been considered as a frontier by several political ecologies, and these terms contains in itself many symbologies and signification, defining a binomial of known versus unknown territory. And this unknown territory is considered as a land of otherness to dominate. Then frontier making is a territorialization mechanism to establish land control through practical and legal instruments such as militarization or like land control. Then this leads to the categorization of local inhabitants and the subsequent criminalization and marginalization, in this case of peasants. Then I refer to the theory of Gramsci that defines hegemony as the superstructure of worldviews and norms that maintain the domination of one class over another and ensure that this domination is considered as natural by the dominated. However, Gramsci also highlights that every hegemony is contrasted by a counter-hegemonic process, that is a constructive processes resulting from the coordination of all the subordinated classes. Then I identified as counter-hegemonic discourse the local epistemology and peasants' ontology. And post-development theory helps to understand this clash between the government Western ontology and the local ontology, as this theory that comes from decolonial theories focus on challenges the linear and Western developmental development idea from the West. And it collides, when it comes to the local reality, it collides with the local categories of Buen Vivir and Vivir Sabroso that comes from Afro and indigenous communities. And these categories refer to their way of living in the community and their life plans, which are based on interdependency and cooperative interactions with the territory that they inhabit. So the research was based on a mixed methodology that the first part of the research regarded the review of academic literature and institutional documents such as national and regional plans. The second part was dedicated to the fieldwork and then to participatory observation and interviews. And the third phase was dedicated to the data analysis through the narrative policy analysis and the thematic analysis of the interviews. The participant observation was structured in 4 field visits. The first 2 were dedicated to present the project to the communities, and the second 2 were dedicated to the 16 semi-structured interviews, in particular with the peasants, but in particular with leaders and local healers. Then the narrative policy analysis focused on the last 4 national development plans of Colombia for a period that goes from 2006 until 2022. So this narrative policy analysis that focuses on the language and the symbols and categories that are deployed in the policies. I focused on 3 main hegemonic narratives. In this scheme, I resumed the main strategies of the different governments concerning development, conservation, and militarization. So the narrative of the analysis shows that also that the territorialization following the different national plans changes respect to different developmental and economic aims, as you can see, like in the second column. This is the Amazon region, and it changes like the biological region. It emerged also that development is considered as a synonymous of growth, and that growth is conceived, is reached by capital accumulation. So these policies are meant to foster private foreign direct investments, trade liberalization, and extractivism. Then green narrative also links sustainability to the economy. And in this case, in the case of Colombia, conservation is also a reason to deploy military forces and to displace local inhabitants from areas of interest. So what happens here is that conservation legitimated the glyphosate aspersion and the massive contamination of the land. Then the war narrative caused the criminalization of the farmers, as they were identified as narcos and as guerrilleros, and caused also then their dispossession. Thank you. From the participant observation and the interview, it results that the local process of resistance is then based on three main elements: cooperation, relational ontology, and political ontology. And cooperation comes because of the sharing of a common imaginary and a common situation of struggle to face illegal actors and to face also the strong governmental oppression. And this common imaginary is built on a relational ontology that conceives nature as a subject, and on the interdependency then with nature and with plants. And this leads to a political ontology that is a term that is described by Escobar as the interconnection of different practices of social and environmental fights. In conclusion, so the hegemonic narratives that I described before created the terrain of struggle for these counter-hegemonic processes. And these processes bring together all the communities like indigenous, Afro, and peasant communities, sharing this same imaginary and sharing the same territories and struggle, that then comes together in a same ontology, that is a syncretic ontology that is built on the traditional knowledges of these different ethnicities, and together they build a counter discourse that erodes the dominant imaginary and works to build a transformative alternative. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for the presentation and also to keep the time. Now we remain in Colombia with the contribution of Natalia Celis about climate change, a socio-environmental conflict in Colombia Amazon rainforest, a GIS approach to map and assess forest fires. Thanks. Natalia, the floor is yours. You can start.
Okay, thank you, Massimo.
Only one moment.
Yeah.
Only one moment. Thank you. We have another translator, simultaneous translation, and you can activate and update the translation on Zoom. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Can I start?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. First, I want to start talking about the Colombian Amazon. It's covered around 40% of the Colombian continental territory. There are present 5 main biomes where tropical rainforest prevails, with 60% of the total area. Is as well known that they have a special importance at national and international level. However, since 2010, the forest fires
colombiana che sono aumentati addirittura del 30%.
are increasing the number and in magnitude.
Quindi stanno aumentando sia il numero che la grandezza.
There are logical questions. What is happening there? In order to study this, I decided to choose a municipality with
ho scelto di parlare delle municipalità
also is located in the department Caquetá.
in
This is the area.
particolare di questa area che vedete qui sulla slide.
This municipality has chosen because 4 main aspects. The first is because obviously it's located in the Colombian Amazon. Second, according with the data, the forest fires are increasing very heavily in this zone. Third, because as you can see in this left map, there are in a special part on an interesting legal status. According with the Colombian government, it's possible to change the land use in order to improve the well-being in this area. According with the government, they say that. And the last but not least is because the Cartagena-Chará is an important zone before and after and during the peace agreement. Okay, as I mentioned before, the forest fires are increasing. This is the behavior since 2013. The 2 circles are showing 2 important moments in the Colombian history. The first is when the peace agreement was signed, and in 2018 was when the peace agreement was start to be implemented. As you can see, this forest fires increased in number and magnitude in this year. We don't know why, so I want to start to study this. Also, you can see here that the forest fires in the Amazon has a cyclical behavior. For this reason, I decided to split the forest fires into seasons, where DAF, meaning December, January, and February, and March, April, and May, have the maximum number of forest fires. It seems to be strongly related to meteorological and socioeconomic factors. For the reason, the objective of this investigation is assessing forest fires in the Colombian Amazon through climate change as environmental factors. This is a brief of the methodology. I use socioeconomic condition using secondary information. Also, I use Landsat images to try to get the land cover, meteorological information from ERA 5, climate condition from CMIP 6 scenarios, trying to know what is the importance of age variable in order to explain the behavior of forest fires. I used a model, a machine learning model, to try to assess this. I get some results. The first result was related with the spatio-temporal distribution. Here in this heat map, you can see that the land cover is basically two main land covers. The TLC, that means the tree cover open forest, sorry, and the second one is shrubs, that is shrubs. The location or the spatial location of these two main land cover classification is, if you can see the yellow one surrounding the river is the shrubs, and the second one, the open forest, is in this zone in orange. So what happened? I know that because the literature that the shrubs in Colombia in this zone is related to agriculture. I decided to overlap some maps to try to know how is the expansion of the agriculture in these zones. For example, if you can see this D map, the last one, is the overlapping the agriculture in 2002 versus 2020. If you can see the agriculture is growing surrounding the river. And in this map, the right map, you can see the forest fires in the last decade. The behavior is similar to the expansion, the expansion to the agriculture. So here we are already an important driver, that is the agriculture on the zone, but that not explain why the rainforest is burning on the EAF and M&M. For the reason, I decided to study the meteorological variables. I decided to study in two main methodologies. First, using anomalies. I just decided to put here the anomaly of temperature. You can see that in the days where are present forest fires in this zone, the temperature is in average 5 Kelvin up in comparison with the days that are not forest fires. If you can see here on the green circle, is where the temperature are the most increased values, and coincides with the zones where are the majority of forest fires in this area. In general, I can analyze that, for example, the temperature in the days with forest fires, that is in this graph, the red boxes are the red one. Yes. And
Natalia, the last 3 minutes.
yes. The humidity is lower. Also, the total column water vapor is lower in these zones. So I can conclude that, for example, the temperature, the humidity, and the column water vapor has an important where we are talking about to the forest fires. Also, the climate conditions, if we are talking about to the condition in 2020, what happened with the temperature? If we are talking about the last scenario, the worst scenario, the temperature will increase 10 kelvins in total. That is a lot. And the temperature will decrease 6%, more or less, say 6% the humidity. Regarding the socioeconomical characteristics, I choose some of them that where I can find some data. For example, I decided to split the urban and rural population. I also contemplate the GDP, the multidimensional poverty index, the informal work, variables related with the work, like a massacres, forced recruitment, displacement. These variables, all of these variables that I talked about before, was an input to this model, trying to understand the behavior, but how I did it. I determined it through the scenarios, using a magical phrase, what happened if? What happened if I decide to increase 0.8% the rural population? Here, the first one, the blue line is for the behavior of forest fires through the year without any increase or decrease parameter. And the yellow one is the forest fires if I decide to increase 0.8% the rural population. The change is 73%. This means that the forest fires will increase 17%. Was the same logic with the informal work. What happened if I increase the informal work? And the change with the forest fires is 37%. There are some conclusions that we already know, that the land cover changes is mainly related with the small scale agriculture. Also, the temperature, humidity, and the total column water vapor are important. And for example, the rural population, the displacement, and variable important for the forest fire behaviors. And here is what is the next step, is try to design and prioritize strategies in the context of climate change, using the resource that I just mentioned, and taking into account the scenarios of CMIP6, the climate change scenarios. Thank you very much.
So, thanks, Natalia, for this work and to analyze in detail what is happening in this context using the power of satellite images and geographic information technology. I let the floor now to Matteo Spini for the presentation on Decolonizing Friday for Future. Thanks, Matteo, because I think this is very important contribution on the reflection on the action from below of different actors in this climate justice. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and hello, good afternoon, everybody. So my PhD research was centered on Fridays for Future Italy, So this is somehow a side project that I have developed, which is about the evolution of the movement at the global level, and in specific about the internal decolonization process. So I think we all know Fridays for Future is probably the most important climate movement in the last year. And it was founded in 2018. And at the beginning, it was a Western-based middle class and white movement, with its initial position quite close to scientism. And it quickly developed a climate justice frame, which at the beginning lacked an intersectional approach. So basically, the movement after the foundation by Greta Thunberg in Sweden spread also to the global south. But let's say that in the first months, the northern activists, so the activists from the global north, maintained a position of power within the movement, and with some accusations of Eurocentrism, racism, and white saviorism. For instance, Disha Ravi, who's an activist from India, like in public articles, declared that the movement was pretty whitewashed at the beginning, and with no understanding of the daily life of people living in the global south. Then with this criticism, the movement has changed a lot. So first of all, in 2019, Greta Thunberg traveled to the USA, and basically, especially through Toccata Ironized and indigenous activists, she basically she touched the reality of indigenous people in the USA. So she started developing a more intersectional and decolonial thought. And 2020 was a crucial year because on one hand, the lockdown forced the movement to digitalize. But at the same time, this was the opportunity to develop a series of online decolonization training, which were developed by a group of activists who named themselves Friday for Future MAPA. And then I'm explaining this subgroup of Fridays for Future, which was created in the same year of the lockdown, 2020. And so MAPA is basically most affected people and areas. So it's basically the global south, so the territories which were colonized, plus the marginalized communities living in the global north, such as indigenous, Black people, women, LGBTQIA people, etc. And all these territories and areas are more affected by the climate crisis. And so basically, this subgroup of Friday for Future has played a crucial role in the internal decolonization of the movement. And so in 2021 was another important year because the 6th global strike of Friday for Future for the first time incorporated this decolonial and intersectional approach developed by the subgroup MAPA. And the following year, Turin hosted 2 events. So the second European meeting of the movement and the Climate Social Camp, which was organized not only by Friday for Future, but also by other movements. And in this occasion, the reality of some racist and even anti-indigenous behaviors inside not only Friday for Future, but also inside the other climate movements was crucial, was publicly debated. And so this was again a fundamental year of this process of internal decolonization. But what does it mean in practice, this ongoing process? First of all, I think that the starting point can be the decolonization of the mind, to use Frantz Fanon words, which is, first of all, eradicating white saviorism which has been denounced, for instance, by Mitzi Yonel-Tan from Friday for Future MAPA, and to eradicate other racial biases that many times Northern climate activists have. And so this means recognizing the Western white privilege and using it to favor a process of internal redistribution of power, redistribution of resources, and redistribution of visibility. So by redistribution of power, I mean following MAPA's decision and actively supporting them instead of simply following decision taken by Northern activists. And redistribution of resources, meaning funds from Northern activists to Southern activists, for instance, to join international events. Redistribution of visibility, for instance, in social media, mass media, and public events. So the step back of Greta Thunberg as the face of the movement from 2020 has given more room to MAPA leaders such as Vanessa Nakate from Friday for Future Uganda. 2 minutes. So I'm gonna skip. So basically, the movement has also developed a decolonial diagnostic frame and a decolonial prognostic frame. Prognostic frame is basically the social construction of solutions. So in short, it's not only stopping the atmospheric colonization, but also uprooting a system based on colonialism, based on capitalistic accumulation, and so on. And this means also rejecting some of the Northern solutions that reproduce epistemic injustice and green colonialism, such as many forms of carbon offsetting. And so replacing this solution with the solutions that come from MAPA communities, okay, such as climate reparations and protection of indigenous lands in order to achieve procedural and epistemic justice within the climate policies. And this also implies this uprooting of the system, a radical abandonment of the so-called imperial mode of living of the global north. And jumping to the conclusions, I think that this process of decolonization of climate movements is a very complex, conflictual, but also necessary process. And I want to conclude with these words of Mitzi Yonel-Tan from Friday for Future MAPA. So decolonizing climate activism is going to be a lifelong process of unlearning, and it's going to hurt. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matteo. It is a very important contribution because the challenge of climate justice and the role of social movement should take into account the complexity of a movement existing in the world. Thanks. I let the floor now online to Pablo Toro. He presents an interesting point of view from a global south country of Ecuador about the global legally binding agreement to fight plastic pollution.
Thank you very much, Maximo. Thank you very much to all the team in the UNIPD and also in this 5th edition of the conference. Can you hear me well? Only that.
Yeah, we can hear you. And do you want to try to share your screen? Okay.
Okay.
Are you able to share? Otherwise, I can share the presentation if you want.
Yes, please. I would really appreciate if you can share it for the people in Milan. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the people that is sharing us in online.
Give me a second.
Yeah, in order to take all the all the time. I will start to introduce myself. Actually, I'm in Ecuador. Actually, I'm finishing this master degree program in the UniPD, and this have a local action and a local value for me. And I will start only to show in this first next slide. It is thinking globally and acting locally. The plastic pollution is a globally issue that is affecting all the ocean and also the coast countries and also the insular countries. For me, as a part of this master's program, it's always important to think all the global situations and try to create climate action in locals. The next one, please. To start with this research, we must understand how the impact is of the global contamination and what are the efforts in the international field to create and to generate alternatives of development. The plastic global situation is a crisis now because the planetary boundaries are rising. And if we don't keep this 1.5 alive to the 2030, it will be a really complex situation to recover all the damage that we have in the climate and also in the human health. The plastic pollution is a matter of waste management, because even when the population increase in all the global now and in the global also in the north and in the south, we create a circle of production and also for consumption. This phenomenon also affects the oceans in the way of that we are creating a kind of patch of global waste island of plastics. This is one of the main points that really motivate me to study the affections of Ecuador, even when Ecuador have also insular territories as the Galapagos, how these big patches of plastic could affect the south of the country, I mean. In a really special moment that we have with the main stakeholders here in Ecuador, we create a really useful forum to ask to these main stakeholders what are the most important topics that must to be taken into account in this new legal international legal agreement. They all agree that the situation in the globally of the plastic pollution is really strong, but one of the main aspects that they could present in this summary is to create a really good mechanism of waste management that could improve the health of all the chain in this process, because we have the consumers, we have the productive, and also we have the labor force that is working in this chain. The next one, please. We have also this situation of deficient waste management and overproduction of plastic products with additives. The three main international agreements of contamination products that are Basilea, Stockholm, and Rotterdam with chemical additives say that the production and the waste management are the key activities that we must to enforce in the public sector and also in the private sector to have a better situation in the future. You can see a really simple scheme of how the water movement affects this big patch of plastic pollution. We can now, through the limitations that we have, even with the observation of these big dynamic masses of plastics, we can notice that in the north part of the Pacific is creating a really big patch of plastic that is affecting the nearest coast of the US. Then we have a permanent influence of the marine aeolic movements that are capturing all the last 3 minutes. Thank you very much. The next one, I could say that in Ecuador, the most important thing that we in this research was important to notice is about the eco design that is promoting in this new law that we have. And the baseline of 2019 show us that in Ecuador, only the 6% of the garbage is effectively recycling. Next one, please. Next one. As you can notice, here's the situation, the baseline. And in the last one, the red one container has the contamination of the productive plastic products that ends in the water. The 5% of the plastic pollution products ends in the water, in the ocean, or in the corpus of water. Next one, please. What are we going to do now? Even when this is a matter of local authorities, because the garbage and the design of the waste management must to be generated in the local community and in local level, we are trying to generate a power balance actions. The next one, please. Taking in account that the international agreement is participated mainly by the government, we have several stakeholders that are participating, and we cross different alternatives of different variables about the empowerment. If the empowerment is centralized in the government, it depends also of the participation that the government makes in the main international spaces. But also we have industry, and also we have the plastic corporation that are working in this part. This is a correlation data that we start to do it. The next one, please, and the last. This is the main power mapping stakeholder that we have. And now in this NCT, that is International Negotiation Committee, was celebrated in Paris, the main stakeholder was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But the next one that's going to take place in Nairobi, we're going to have more technical and specific and scientific stakeholders that must to be in the core of the process. The next one, please. What coming next? Now, it's important to say that the international legal agreement is not, it's supposed to be not a failed solution, because even when the specific negotiation topics must to separate types of products that legally will be forbidden to produce and also to transport, there are all others that will must to be excluded. For example, the medical plastic products, and also for the agriculture plastic products. Then we also have climate action, where we must to be really aware of the fake solutions that this strategy and the next strategies want to take in force, and also of people, because all the recycle force or the labor force in this chain must to be taken into account and also called in dignity. This last photo is from yesterday of the Ministry of Government, the Ministry of Environment, giving the certification to this 30 first recycle labor force as educative recognition of their effort. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicolas, for this contribution. Now we move to Luigi Conte. Luigi Conte is here in Milano. He shared with us a reflection of a participatory research intervention approach related to climate change, food system, comparing agro-industrial and agroecological perspective in CCD. Please, thanks, Luigi. The floor is yours.
Hello to everybody. I'm Luigi Conte. I'm doing a PhD in the environmental sciences at Ca' Foscari in Venice. And today I will present this research, which is a collective one we are carrying out with colleagues from social sciences, with farmers in Sicily, and also with activists dealing with climate change and analysis of agri-food systems with participatory approach. So just about research questions. So we are asking ourselves which are the limits for an agroecological transition in Western Sicily under a climate change scenario. And this is really related to our positioning as researchers and activists within science collective, supporting local communities, and also researcher working with labor union, issues related to food. So this is very ongoing research and preliminary results. So about data and information I will show, it's merging literature review and fieldwork carried out with field observations, but also semi-structured interview. But our perspective is to integrate qualitative research with quantitative one. So just to show you the situation actually in the Mediterranean and so in Sicily. So Sicily is mainly cropland everywhere. And so the climate is marked by seasonal cycle of precipitation. So basically you have wet winters and dry summers. So what you store in winters as water, you can use in summer for growing stuff. So this very much constrains agriculture there. What we expect from climate studies is reduction in precipitation in the whole Mediterranean, accompanied by extremes in heat waves, so temperature will rise as it's shown like on the right. So distribution shifts basically, and you will have more extremes, and this defines Mediterranean Sea as a hotspot because also historically climate changed very much. So this is an issue, and we are going to expect to change things there. But so very quickly, historically, Sicily show actually a very important conflict for water that actually is related to the development of agriculture there between 60s and 80s. A lot of public money was spent to construct like irrigation network, but also dams. And this was related to peasant struggles there, and is also related to what's going on now. Because, for example, if you compare, so it's our work to compare water use in Campobello, where we have extractive supply chain of olives with respect to the farmer networks we are working with traditional practices and low input agriculture. So this shows a little bit of the comparison. So on the left you have basically images showing local small-scale farming that is very adapted to climate and with autonomous water storages and sometimes also communal water management and local traditional practices to grow food, which actually requires very low water inputs. And on the other hand, you have this the olives supply chain, which is not the only one, but it's our proxy, you know, here that that actually needs a lot of irrigation, public infrastructure, and you need water also for treatment because olives need to be big, and this is very related to the quality narrative of this product. But one of the main issue actually is work there because I mean the olive supply chain in Campobello is basically it works like extraction of values that tries to follow seasonal cycles for retail trade and actually needs not only a lot of inputs from natural resources but cheap labor. And this means exploitation of migrant workers that actually live in a condition with no access to water. And so this is actually the lens from political ecology, you know, it gives you a perspective to say, okay, water is related to power actually in this lens, and with respect to the work of the agricultural network, it's ongoing process of experimentation of self-organization, co-production, self-organized distribution, and so we're working on it actually, and it's interesting. So from the political principles, the network is based on solidarity and mutual aid. So for the Mercato network aims at transformation through breakpoints, for example, through system of participatory warranties, so that actually recognizes quality certificates as a tool for governance and also power to decide what we eat, actually. So we oppose this kind of narratives, supporting self-organization of migrant worker, but also seeking connection with climate justice movement in the cities and a social anti-mafia movement there, because it's an issue and also related to water. Our method is participative, as I'm saying. So what I'm showing is not just my job. And So related to the very question of which are the barriers for an agroecological transition in Sicily and how this deals with climate change. So I think we already find a lot of connection with a lot of things that have been presented before. So risk of fires, droughts, economic barriers, socio-cultural problems. I mean, I'm not going into the detail of this, but the point is that climate change will exacerbate this mechanism. So in perspective, I just want to cite Laura Conti as a pioneering work on ecological systems analysis. So we claim that analyzing energy and material flows in this kind of systems give a perspective to understand how the system will respond to climate change and changes in water management, that actually there is an issue. So this shows energy system language perspective, that it's actually going to be quantitative at some point. And on the top I show like an adapted system, like you store water inside the system, you are resilient. That's a very basic representation of an ecosystem, but there you see an extractive process driven by economic flows that needs a lot of auxiliary energy. So those are the principles we are going to look for and to develop an analysis. So thank you. Thanks, Luigi.
Thanks, Luigi, to opening this sub-session about agroecology and food sovereignty. I let the floor now to Gabriel Sainz. He shared with us the research underlined in ongoing in the Andean of Ecuador about right land, soil, and agroecosystem, multi-scale analysis of agroecological status of farm. Please, Gabriel, the floor is yours. You can start with your presentation.
Thank you, Matteo. Can you confirm if you can hear me well?
Yes. If you can improve a little your microphone, in order we can listen better you.
How about this? Is it better?
Yeah, okay, go on.
Thank you so much. Well, as Massimo said, hello everybody. My name is Gabriel. I am currently living in Ecuador. I am finishing the master, and I'm going to present you this work, which is multi-scale analysis of agroecological development of farms in northern central Ecuadorian Andes. So we're first going to see a brief introduction, the methods used to evaluate this, the results, the discussion, and next steps. So first of all, why agroecology? As our colleague previously introduced, agroindustry has shaped the development model, especially in Latin America, where it has contributed to the privatization of biological and natural resources, intensified the land uses and land cover changes, lobbying for free trade agreements and indebtedness mechanisms, and land accumulation by dispossession of peasants. So agroecology has emerged as one of the most prominent alternatives to address social, economic, and environmental asymmetries. It is both a set of practices and a social movement which proposes a change in agricultural production, consumption, and distribution paradigm. By design, it provides a balanced environment and sustained yields through design of diversified agroecosystems. However, the transition to agroecology complex systems like a farm, for example, is a process that largely depends on multiple factors, which might be biological, geographic, social, economical, and political as well. These factors will also determine the resilience that a farm might have, which is that in cases of greater resilience, there's a chance that given a disturbance, the farm will endure the agroecological transition, or with lesser resilience, it will reverse to the previous state, which might be conventional production, or reach an alternative state, which might be permanent degradation. In Ecuador, the familiar agriculture, which is mainly the most sector that practices agroecology, represents 84.5% of agricultural production units, and it supplies with 74% of agricultural production. However, the scaling up of agroecology here in Ecuador faces a lot of severe challenges, such as lack of government support, weak regulation, scarce cooperation programs, and limited access to commercial spaces, as we saw in the previous presentation. For this, it is urgent for us to find mechanisms to accompany this process of agroecological transition here in Ecuador. So my study focuses on assessing the degree of agroecological development of small-scale farms using a multi-scale analysis, and whilst it is a collaborative investigation where it aims to strengthen current capacities from different actors and evaluate the performance of these indicators as a way of measuring agroecological transformation. So first, we talk about a multi-scale approach. We talk about going from landscape through this main agroecological structure methodology, which I will detail next. A mid-scale, which is the soil health evaluation, and a microscale, which consists on assessing soil microbiology. So the main agroecological structure is a methodology, a qualitative methodology for characterizing the landscape, and it gives us a view departing from 10 indicators, 5 which concentrates on ecology, which is mainly the distribution of forest patches and light fences on the agroecological farm, and cultural management, which is the decisions that producers might have over the space. Soil health evaluation. So soil health is the capacity for soil to function within ecosystem and land use boundaries, whilst it promotes plant, animal, and human health, which is the concept of one health. The soil is healthy, the crops are healthy, the people are healthy as well. So the healthy soil is a decisive factor for farm resilience. We nowadays know that a healthy soil is the basement for agricultural yield, production, and quality of it. And third, soil microbiology. So microbiology is one of the main aspects of soil health, however, is largely understudied. And we propose to study it through a method of microscopy, directly observing microorganisms, and through another methods of quantifying how much of the microbiomass we have. As far as now, we have processed some farms in northern Ecuador, which is really nearby to Quito, which is the capital city of Ecuador. If you can see in the map on the right bottom, we see Cayambe, which is a city really close to it. And we have assessed 5 farms as far as now. So the main agroecological structure, which is the methodology for assessing the landscape, has given us these results. In general, it is moderately developed, which means that the farms have a moderate connectivity with the landscape in general, which makes them far more resilient in case of a disturb. However, in Cayambe has a really strong history of land use and land change conversion from agribusiness and considerably from flower production, which has
Gabriel, the last 3 minutes.
Thank you, Massimo. Which has weakened a lot the main ecological structure that surrounds the farms. We can see this because the 5 last indicators are generally high, which reflects the process that producers have undergone in terms of generating capacity whilst generating knowledge about how to manage the farm. But other factors that do not depend upon them are the ones they have the lowest scores, which is the amount of forest and nature ecological landscape that they have surrounding their own exploitations. So we have seen that the size is an important constraint for the application of this methodology, and mainly because of the appropriation of land in Cayambe. The farms for agroecological production are rather small, and this methodology is far better with large farms. However, with small farms, it has some issues. However, it gives us a really good view of how is the transition. There's a general lack of an ecological structure, as we said before, because of the intense change in land use and land cover changes by agribusiness. Apart from that, we see that it's really important, the process of capacity building. The producers we've been interviewing and accompanying this process have had at least 15 years of cooperation with local NGOs in terms of agroecological transition. So we see that despite the fact that there's nothing we can do about controlling the landscape conversion as a producer, the knowledge can be counter-effective in terms of enhancing agroecological transition and production. So the next steps would be to complement these main agroecological structure studies with the soil health and microbiome analysis to widen our study, including other provinces, to compare how is the story, because we see that Cayambe is a really unique case in terms of how long have they received a lot of contribution from many NGOs, local organizations as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks, Gabriel, for this presentation. We stay again the issue of soil health with Elvira Ines. It is about exploring participatory approaches for soil health knowledge co-production in agroecological network. Please, Ines, the floor is yours. 9 minutes for presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes, but if you can be more closer to the microphone in order.
How about now? Okay.
Okay, go.
All right. So I'm going to present the topic of healing our soils, exploring participatory approaches for soil health knowledge co-production in agroecological networks. We'll look into the introduction, the research objective, a bit of the concepts and the analytical framework, as well as methodologies and some case studies. Upon a handful of soil, our survival depends. Care for it, and it will grow our food, our fuel, and our shelter, and surround us with beauty. Abuse it, and the soil will collapse and die, taking humanity with it. That's coming from the Vedas scripture. Soils is very important. It's 95% of our food comes from the soil, and already about like 1/4 of our planet's biodiversity lives in the soil. However, 33% of our soil is degraded, and between 60 and up to 70% of our soils in Europe are degraded. And soils can also store and filter water, and they can be the basis for healthy food. They can also help combat and adapt to climate change. And it's actually a non-renewable resource. It can take up to 1,000 years to produce just 2 to 3 centimeters of soil. So that's why my research objective is to explore participatory processes for soil health knowledge co-production in agroecological networks. So soil health is the vitality of a soil in sustaining the socio-ecological functions of its unfolding lands. And the knowledge co-production can be understood as an iterative and collaborative processes involving diverse types of expertise, knowledge, and actors to produce context-specific knowledge and pathways towards a sustainable future. These approaches have several benefits, as they can enable more socially and ecological robust knowledge for complex and emancipatory interactions that are characteristic of weak problems, participatory and farmer-centered processes and outcomes in agroecology. At the same time, they can also pose challenges and tensions due to different perspectives, languages, norms, values, or lacking communication and trust. This is the analytical framework that I'm using that looks into the elements of knowledge co-production, and I'm applying a multiple case study approach. Looking into 3 main case studies, Rete Humus, which is an Italian social network for bioagriculture, and Nabdania, which is an earth-centric and women-centric farmer-led movement, as well as the Soil Living Labs, which is a EU soil mission to implement a mission implementation tool. Rete Humus is using participatory monitoring approach for biodiversity in organic farming and their territories called BioBlitz, and it's using the principles of citizen science involving farmers, trade organic associations, local economic operators, citizens, and researchers. And some knowledge outputs and outcomes is that Rete Humus would be able to create its guarantee for products, that is certification, and that would mean that it's an opportunity for farmers to have a voice as well at the political levels, as well as promoting a knowledge that informs better citizens about the products, and it's farmers that are also can control these processes. Navdanya is also a farmer and women-led movement that aims to protect the biological and cultural diversity, reclaiming the commons, and through seed sovereignty and earth democracy. And it's implementing practical workshops and trainings on the regeneration of the soil with farmers in the context of their fields. And some knowledge outputs and outcomes are application and conservation of indigenous knowledge on the reincorporation of organic matter with practices such as vermicompost, liquid fertilizers, or closing the nutrient cycles. Finally, the Soil Living Labs and Lighthouses is a methodology that aims to apply 100 living labs and lighthouses to implement the EU Soil Mission, and its knowledge creation process is characterized by co-design and co-development and experimentation of innovations, improving soil health and related ecosystem services, as well as adding some research on impact of innovative practices on ecosystems through a networking and knowledge exchange approach and through practical and real demonstrations. And some of the knowledge outputs and outcomes are the maps of good practices that allow for upscale of solutions, as well as connection of knowledge co-produced to the policy arena directly, as well as supporting financially the projects. And some main conclusions that I would like to highlight is that participatory soil health knowledge co-production in agroecological networks can enable emancipatory agroecologies by challenging the current power structures and cultivating autonomy, as well as knowledge co-production processes can enable dialogues of knowledge and farmer-centered processes, which are essential to address the complex challenges of healing our soils. And potential benefits and challenges in soil health knowledge co-production and strategies for overcoming them can be identified through these type of research. Thank you so much. If you had any questions, don't hesitate to ask or email here.
Thanks, Ines, for this contribution about participatory approach and co-construction of knowledge about soil. Now I let the floor to Margherita De Matteis. We switch to another topic, the topic of adaptation in ski areas in the mountains. The floor is yours, Margherita. Please, you can start with your presentation.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, you can share your screen, please.
Okay, just a moment.
We are not seeing the screen.
Now?
You can share your presentation, or you prefer we share your presentation?
No, can you see my presentation?
No.
Okay, just a moment, just a moment. Okay.
Now it's working. Perfect.
Can you see it?
It's starting.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to present my thesis project about participatory resilient adaptation to climate change in mountain regions, the ski industry vulnerability, and the future sustainable development alternatives in the Valmalenco case study. Okay, here you can see the index with my research objective, that is how a participatory resilient adaptation to climate change in mountain regions can be reached, and which are the possible future alternatives of development of alpine valleys. Here we have the main concept that will be addressed during the presentation. Okay, let's start with the main impacts of climate change in mountain areas. Among them, due to the global warming, we have the melting of glaciers and the permafrost, and we have the snow limit race because there are less snowfalls. Then we have the biodiversity and ecosystem loss, and due to drought, we have mountains are suffering of lack of water that impacts on the traditional agricultural system and livestock farming. And then we have the uncontrolled progress of the forest. Okay, I will introduce you the Transit project where it's the project where I did my internship. It's an international project that lasts 3 years and it involves 11 partners all over Europe and is the acronym of Transitions to Sustainable Ski Tourism in the Alps of Tomorrow. The project aims basically to facilitate the adoption of co-constructed transition processes in mountain resorts, and the mountain resorts are understood as ski resorts with the whole territory and the whole economy, we can say. It is based on a participatory and inclusive approach involving local communities, and the main challenge is to promote new models of economic, social, and environmental development in order to support a lively future in the Alpine mountain areas with a view to sustainability. The Transit project in Italy focused mainly on 2 living labs. I focused basically on Valmalenco. That is a valley located in the Italian Eastern Alps. It's a branch of Valtellina Valley. It includes the Bernina Massif that is on the border with Switzerland. The resident population at the moment is approximately 5,000 people in 5 municipalities. One of the main characteristics of the area is that there are beautiful landscapes and the nature is very wild. And talking about the line of territorial development undertaken over the years, basically was the investments in the development of the ski area that with the mine sector in the past was the main driving force of the local economy. But today, the ski industry in the ski sector is tackling a crisis and is becoming more and more vulnerable. We can see here the weaknesses and the impacts of the ski industry. Starting from the weaknesses, we know that climate change produces less snow, and the snow is more and more produced at higher altitudes. Then we have operating costs such as the price of energy, for example, for snowmaking production that increased, and especially in this last period. And then we have a strong interest behind, and here we can link this concept of monoculture of skiing that didn't allow to other activities to develop in the mountains because it was basically a monoculture as, for example, in the agricultural sector. Among the impacts, we have the destruction of natural habits and ecosystems. We have an high demand and consumption of water that is withdrawn from the agricultural use and the public use. And in the past, over the years, it caused an unchecked building speculation and development of the mass tourism model. Okay, basically for doing my research and to map the territory and the local community perception of the territory, I used the following methodology. I used an inclusive and participatory approach, and I produced a stakeholder mapping and analysis. So basically I mapped the actors in the territory, and I divided them in many categories. For example, I don't know, mountain guides, ski teacher, or B&B owners, and institutions. And then I administered to everybody an interview with question mainly focused on the past and the current development of the valley, the perception about the population, young people, if they are living or if they are staying, and the opportunity that offers the territory, the ski resorts development implementation, their opinion about that, and the future development alternatives and possible climate change adaptation strategies. And finally, I produced SWOT analysis, and together I collected data and analyzed, but I'm still analyzing some of them. The results of the interview, just focusing on the ski sector implementation, were very different and contrasting because it depended a lot on the stakeholders' opinion. As a pro of the ski sector implementation, we have that it is a model that over the years for sure enabled alpine development and contained the population because it allowed many people to stay there and to have their own activity. But the implementation of the area can contribute to nowadays to a revival of the local economy. But on the other side, based on the opinion that of the stakeholder, we notice that mainly the stakeholders see this sector as a dying dinosaur, also because it requires a large use of public money, and profits are not reinvested in the territory because it's ski resorts are owned by people that come from abroad or outside. It leaves no space for the development of alternative form of tourism, and we link again with the concept of monoculture. And it is necessary so to think about climate change adaptation strategies rather than continue to invest in the construction of new plants. This produced in the area a socio-environmental conflict that is very very well resumed in this reference. Is maybe too long to read, but basically say that to pay the consequence of the ski industry are the local communities, those who have roots in this territory and who trust those who were supposed to guide them towards prosperity. But traveling throughout the Alps, you also discover that mountains dwellers by choice have a taut hide and are capable of getting back up every time many natures present them with a bill. This is why mountain communities are called resilient, because they are used to facing the rigors of time and space. So basically I analyzed the Valmalenco Valley, but this is something that we can see.
The last 2 minutes, Margherita.
Okay, this is something that we can see all over Alps, because for sure the implementation of a ski resort is something that produces a socio-environmental conflict. So now in general, the central issue of the discussion of the development of valleys, of Alpine Valley is should we continue investing in a sector that is now at the limit, going on building new infrastructure, or maybe it's better to recover what is already there, enhancing the territory and natural resources, investing in a more careful and slow tourism. What we need to, basically a lot of, also because of the unsustainability of this sector, what we need to change is that we need a paradigm shift, a development of a participatory resilient adaptation to climate change by the local community, from the local community, and the decentralization and creation of alternative forms of development. What I will work in the next period are basically these 3 points. I will analyze 3 case studies that are positive example of sustainable transitions in the Alps. I will analyze alternative forms of development that do not create a socio-environmental conflict in the area, and understand the replicability of the analyzed sustainable development strategies in other contexts. Thank you.
Thanks, Margherita, to share with us this research on the challenges in the Alps and the conflict related to the transition from ski industry. Now, the last presentation of today, Dennis Grego from Climate Justice Monnet Center of Excellence. He presents a contribution about urban food forest perspective and scenario for good agroecological practice in the city. This presentation is part of the group of a presentation about agroecology, but for a practical reason, we anticipated the presentation of Margherita just because it was online. Please, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I am Dennis Grego, a graduating student at the University of Padua, and I'm now attaining the master's degree in natural science. This presentation is about the urban food forest, which is also the main topic of my thesis, connected to agroecological good practices in a urban context. We will give a definition of urban food forest, and we will see which are the pros and the cons, and then we will see how the topic will be managed in the project thesis. So a urban food forest can be defined as a perennial multicultural system, which is designed and managed to function like a self-sustaining natural forest. So it attempts to mimic a young natural forest system in urban context. And in particular, it should be able to reproduce all the dynamics and all the functions that can be found inside a young forest system. And also it makes use primarily of edible vegetation. So from classic horticulture that can be seen in orchards, to shrubs or fruit trees that are able to produce nuts, trees, etc. Here in this picture, you can see an example of urban food forest. This is the Atlanta food forest. In the middle, the Seattle food forest, which is one of the biggest in North America. The Plettenberg food forest in South Africa, and then an Italian example, the Picasso food forest in the city of Parma. Food forest has a very deep history in some civilities around the world, in particular in South America, where there are a lot of evidences of the presence of forest gardens, which are the food forests, surrounding or inside the human settlements that produced a lot of food, and this food was used by the local population as an important source of food. So it was a fundamental way to survive in a difficult context like the tropical forests. But example like this can be found also in North Africa with the ancient Egyptians, and also in the Middle East and in Asia, in particular in China. In our context, so in Europe or North America, food forest has been rediscovered only recently in the last 50, 60 years. And in particular, only in the last 2 decades, there has been an increasing interest towards urban food forests by scientific community and researchers. And this is going in parallel with a lot of initiatives around the world. And there are a lot of examples here also in Italy, for example, Milan. So let's now try to give a custom pros and cons analysis. If we speak about benefits, we must speak about ecosystem services introduced by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that are divided into 4 main categories: the provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. But with a recent report from FAO about urban and peri-urban forestry, it is underlined the fact that the urban forests are able to produce a lot of benefits inside the city. Just to give some example, they are able to mitigate the negative effect of climate change in the urban context. For example, reducing the impacts of heat islands. But also it is able to improve the soil, the water, and the air quality. It is considered also a shelter of biodiversity, and can also improve the employment situation inside the city. And obviously it is able to produce food. But there are also some aspects that we should take into account. First of all, the management and location. As I said in the definition of urban food forest, they are able to reproduce a young forest system. So it has a savage aspect, And people often are not so happy to see something like this in the middle of the city, and so they prefer to put it outside it, and where maybe services can be less efficient, and so it can be very difficult for people to reach the site. So management and location, but also in general a risk for public health, because if the urban food forest is in a contaminated site, because there are some pollutants in the water or in the soil for industrial land use, all the pollutants can be concentrated inside the edible part of the plant, so the fruits, and then we eat them. So that can be a very good problem. And also the fact that the fruits can improve the spread of pathogens or harmful insects that can become an important problem for public health. So we have a lot of benefits, but also a lot of risk that we should take into account. So let's now see how it will be managed in the project. The project has already began, but it is in the beginning phase, and the aim is to identify the most suitable area in the city of Padua for urban food forest, and we are going to do it through a bibliographic review to resume the state of the art on the arguments, and then we hope also to organize some visit to case of studies, because we think that this is the best way to understand all the potentials, but also the critical issues related to management and location. And then we would like to involve people through some questionnaires. So we will follow a qualitative approach using questionnaires for citizens and stakeholders, and then all the data gained in this way will be analyzed through GIS, in particular with multi-criteria decision analysis, to develop scenarios and suitability maps. So with this project, we would like to encourage public debate through a participatory approach and identify and map the most suitable area for urban food forest in the city of Padua. And then we hope to bring to communities' attention the themes of urban sustainable development and alternative food production paradigms. So this is all, and I thank you for the attention.
Yes. Okay, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the contribution of all speakers. We had the possibility to deal through concrete research of all this work. We have the last 5 minutes. I don't know if there is comments, a contribution, a question from people online, etc. As you know, this session was in presence here in Milano in English. It was translated and streamed in Italian, in English, and in Spanish. I don't know if there is a question or comments from the participants in this room or eventually online. The floor is open for comments and consideration. And I think it is interesting because we worked around some topic. The first topic is the fossil fuel transition with 2 subtopics. One, what happened in the frontiers with the contribution of Francesca Maesche and Natalia Celis in the case of Colombia, and a contribution on the reflection of the role of movement, the European movement, the need from this European world movement to make a transition more inclusive and also to dialogue from a Eurocentric to more intercultural approach. Then we had this interesting contribution from Agroecology with 4 presentations, one a case of Sicilia, the case of soil in Ecuador and in Italy, and the case of urban food forest. And then 2 topics more, one related to the transition in the Alps, the challenges, the conflicts in the ski areas, and the other related to how to manage a global treaty for plastic waste from the point of view of a certain country. I don't know, do you wanted to speak something? No, I saw your hand. Yes, no, okay, no problem. I don't know if there is comments, consideration, if there is a question online, or eventually we can close our presentation as our session on time in order to join the main assembly with all the old people. Thanks to be here. Thanks for people online. As you know, all this presentation will be available in the website of Climate Justice Monnet Center of Excellence. And thanks for people accompanying this 5th conference on climate justice. This conference started the 6th of June with a special topics on agroecology. Then we had the presentation yesterday, more related about path and good practices for transformation and climate adaptation, and today with this issue related to socio-environmental conflict and climate justice. A good afternoon and a good day, depending on the different time zone, and see you soon. Best regards to all. And thanks also, sorry, for the translator, for the big work of the translator in the 3 languages, because they were not able to have all the presentation before. And the second, to the direction of this conference, especially Giuseppe Della Fera, Carlo Zanetti, and Francesco Facchinelli here to make possible, because it's very complicated to manage things in presence, things in distance, and also 3 languages. Okay, many thanks to all to make possible this conference. Ciao again.
Bye bye. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.